I was halfway through my first sip of morning coffee when it happened. A scream, loud enough to rattle windows and sharp enough to freeze your blood, cut through the air like a siren. I nearly dropped my mug, coughing on hot coffee as I shot up from my chair. My heart was pounding before I even made it to the door. Outside, there she was, Karen Willoughby, the woman I'd grown to dread, flailing like a fish on dry land, arms windmilling, face twisted in a mix of rage and shock. It took a few seconds for me to put two and two together. She'd found the fence. Correction, she found the electric fence I had just installed the night before. Now let me make this clear. 2 weeks earlier, if someone had told me I'd end up electrocuting my neighbor, even by accident, I would have called them nuts. But 2 weeks ago, I still thought Karen was just annoying. You know, one of those neighbors who complains if your grass is a half-inch too tall or gives you the stink eye because your dog barks. I didn't know she was capable of turning my life into a personal circus. At that point, I was still under the delusion I could reason with her. That was before she turned trespassing into a hobby. The first time it happened, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I mean, who wouldn't? It was a warm afternoon. I was walking through my fields, checking on my tomato crop. That's when I spotted her. Karen, on the other side of the field, wearing a ridiculous floppy sun hat like she was on a Tuscan holiday. She was plucking tomatoes right off the vines, inspecting them like a picky shopper at the market, tossing the inferior ones to the ground with zero respect, stuffing the others into her tote bag. I was speechless. For a full 30 seconds, I just stood there trying to process the sheer audacity. "Can I help you?" I finally called out, hoping there was some explanation that would make sense. She turned completely unfazed and hit me with one of those fake toothy smiles. "Oh, Jake, you don't mind, do you? These tomatoes are just too perfect to pass up." I blinked. "Yeah, Karen, I do mind. That's called stealing." You'd have thought I accused her of grand larceny the way she gasped. She clutched her chest like I'd insulted her entire family line. "Stealing? Oh, don't be ridiculous. My great-great-uncle's step-cousin's friend used to own this land. So technically, I have every right to be here." I stared at her, dead serious. She wasn't joking. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just clueless. She was in her own world where logic took a vacation. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, her appearances became more frequent. First, it was walking her dog through my fields. No leash, of course. Then she was snipping wildflowers by the handful, waving at me like we were old friends. Next, it escalated to the truly bizarre. One morning, I went to the barn to grab some tools and found her there. Karen, on a yoga mat, in the middle of my barn. Calm music playing on a portable speaker, eyes closed, deep in a downward dog. She looked like she was at a spa retreat. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, trying not to sound as annoyed as I felt. She straightened up like it was no big deal. "Jake, perfect timing. I've been meaning to tell you, this barn has such a peaceful energy. It's perfect for my morning yoga." I rubbed my face, already feeling the headache form behind my eyes. "This is my barn, Karen. You can't just walk in here like it's public property." She rolled up her mat with a huff. "Wow, you really don't understand the concept of community, do you? Sharing is caring, Jake." And that should have been the moment I called the sheriff. But I didn't, because some small part of me thought maybe, just maybe, she'd get bored and move on. Spoiler alert, she didn't. The final straw came a week later. I woke up to the sound of giggling and clinking glasses. Confused, I pulled on my boots and went outside, following the noise. What I found was beyond belief. Karen and 5 of her friends sitting in lawn chairs in the middle of my field, sipping wine, laughing, nibbling on cheese platters. They had made themselves at home, smack dab in the middle of my crops. "Karen," I barked, "what are you doing?" She beamed up at me like we were old college buddies. "Jake, perfect timing. We're having book club. Want to join? We're discussing eat, pray, love." I felt my eye twitch. "You're trampling my crops." She waved it off like I was being dramatic. "Oh, relax. It's just plants. They'll grow back. You should really try to be more easygoing." That was it. The final click in my brain. Trying to reason with Karen was like reasoning with a seagull while it tore apart your lunch. Pointless. She wasn't going to stop until I made her stop. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my land through the window. And then it hit me. The fence. Not a barbed wire one. Not anything dangerous. Just a low-voltage electric fence. Enough to sting. Enough to say, hey, maybe don't walk here. I spent 2 days installing it. Did everything by the book. Posted bright red warning signs every 10 feet. Private property, electric fence, no trespassing. You couldn't miss it unless you were Karen. Which brings us back to that morning. There she was, still on the ground, glaring at me like I was the villain in her soap opera. You electrocuted me, she screeched. I crossed my arms. No, Karen, you electrocuted yourself. I put up signs, big ones. She stumbled to her feet, brushing herself off like a cartoon character. This is illegal, you monster. I could have died. I sighed. It's legal, Karen. County regulations, lowest voltage setting. Maybe next time, respect boundaries. But the look she gave me, I knew right then. This wasn't over, not even close. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was early. Too early. Groaning, I checked the screen and immediately knew what was coming. Karen had posted in the local neighborhood Facebook group. All caps. Full-blown, self-righteous fury. Attention neighbors, beware of the monster next door. He installed an illegal electrified fence. I was nearly killed. I scrolled through the comments. Some of them were what I expected. OMG, Karen, are you okay? How can people be so cruel? But not everyone was buying it. There were a few gems in there. Isn't this the same Karen who got banned from the farmer's market for stealing eggs? I live near Jake. He's got clear signs up. Maybe, don't trespass. Karen, didn't you say last month nature belongs to everyone? And now you're mad you got caught? I chuckled. Small victories. But Karen wasn't done. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock, the kind that promised drama. I opened it to find her standing there, clutching a manila envelope like it was a weapon. You have one chance, Jake, she snapped. Take down the fence or face legal action. I opened the envelope. Inside was a document so poorly put together, it looked like she made it in Word using Comic Sans. Typos everywhere. It wasn't even signed by a lawyer. I laughed. You printed this off the internet, didn't you? Her face flushed red. That's not the point. The point is, you've endangered me, and if you don't take down that fence, you'll regret it. I pulled up the county property laws on my phone and showed them to her. Low-voltage fences are legal on private farmland. Warning signs are required, which I have. Case closed. She stared at the screen, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then she screamed, loud enough to make my ears ring, and stormed off. But I knew she wasn't backing down. If anything, this just made her more determined. Later that day, I got another notification. Karen had upgraded her tactics. Now she had gathered a group, 5 other Karens by the look of them, and they were protesting in front of my farm. Homemade signs and all. Farms should be free. No more electric violence. One lady was chanting, tomato justice. Tomato justice. I grabbed a chair and a cold beer, sat on the porch and watched. Honestly, it was entertainment. Within an hour, most of them got bored and left. Karen, though, she stayed. She glared at me like she wanted to set my crops on fire with her mind. Then she left too, shouting, "This isn't over." She was right. Later that night, I heard rustling by the fence. I figured it was an animal. Nope. Karen, sneaking around, holding a flashlight, muttering to herself. I pulled up my security camera feed and hit record. She was wearing gardening gloves. Really thought she was going to outsmart the fence this time. She reached out. Zap. A muffled yelp. She shook her hand, muttered something I'm sure wasn't family-friendly, and tried again. Zap. Louder this time. I was practically crying laughing by the time she grabbed a stick to push at the fence. The stick slipped, and she tumbled face first into a puddle. I couldn't help it. I laughed, loud enough for her to hear. She froze, slowly turned toward my house and hissed, "You!" I raised my coffee mug. "Karen, seriously, do you ever learn?" She stormed off, shoes making those awful squelching sounds as she disappeared into the night. But the next morning was about to bring something even better. The next morning, I was finishing my eggs and toast when the banging started. Not a polite knock, not the kind of knock a neighbor gives when they want to borrow a cup of sugar. No, this was the kind of knock that promised drama. And there it was. Karen standing on my porch like a storm cloud ready to rain hellfire, arms crossed, jaw clenched. But this time, she didn't come alone. Behind her stood two police officers. One was older, with a tired expression like he'd rather be anywhere else. The other was younger, but she had that same look. You know the one. Like this wasn't their first Karen rodeo. Karen jabbed a finger in my direction before I could even say good morning. "That's him," she barked. "That's the man who tried to kill me with his death trap of a fence." I raised my coffee cup. "Morning, officers." The older cop sighed. "Sir, we're responding to a complaint about an illegal electric fence on your property." Karen cut in before I could answer. "Illegal! Dangerous! Brutal!" She shoved her hands at them. "Look at this! Look at what he did to me!" She was showing them her palms like she just crawled out of a war zone, but there wasn't a single mark on them. The younger officer sighed. "Ma'am, we'll have to investigate this ourselves." "Be my guest," I said, stepping aside. The two of them walked the fence line, checking my signs. They tested the voltage with their equipment. It didn't take long. They glanced at each other, then came back over. The older one cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the fence is legal. Low voltage, proper signage. He's within his rights." Karen's mouth dropped open. "What? No, 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 no. That can't be right. It's dangerous. I could have died." The younger officer's patience was hanging by a thread. "Ma'am, you were shocked because you trespassed on private property. If you had respected the no trespassing signs, none of this would have happened." Karen's eyes were wild now. "You're just going to let him get away with attempted murder?" Both officers gave her the same look, the kind that said, "We've dealt with worse." The older cop flipped open his notepad. "Actually, since we're here, we do need to address something." Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" He held up his phone. "We've got security footage of you trespassing and attempting to tamper with private property." I smiled. That was my footage, and it was gold. The younger cop tore off a citation from her pad and handed it to Karen. "You're lucky we're just giving you a fine. If Mr. Turner wanted to press charges, you'd be looking at something a lot more serious." Karen stood there frozen, staring at the ticket like it was a bomb about to go off. Her hands shook. Then she let out this screech, one of those primal sounds that makes you wonder if someone's about to transform into a banshee, and stormed off. The cops gave me a polite nod before they left. As soon as they were gone, I leaned back in my chair and laughed until my stomach hurt. Finally, I thought, maybe that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days passed. No Karen, no Facebook posts accusing me of crimes against humanity. No impromptu protests at my fence. Nothing. And while most people would have celebrated the peace and quiet, it made me uneasy. Karen wasn't the type to give up. She was the type to reload. That night I sat on my porch, nursing a beer and watching the fence line. It was too quiet. Even the crickets seemed nervous. Around midnight I heard it, rustling. I set my drink down and grabbed my flashlight, making my way toward the sound. And there she was, Karen. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man, probably her husband, though from the look on his face, I got the feeling he wasn't thrilled about being there. He was holding a pair of bolt cutters, looking like he'd rather be holding a divorce paper. Karen saw me and pointed like a villain in a superhero movie. "This is your fault, Jake Turner." Her husband gave her a side eye like he was regretting every life choice that led him to this moment. I crossed my arms. "Karen, you know I have cameras recording this, right?" She ignored me and turned to the man. "Cut it. Cut the fence." He hesitated. Karen, maybe this isn't such a good idea." "Do it!" she shrieked. Poor guy. He sighed, lifted the cutters, and the second they touched the fence, zap. He let out a yell and stumbled back, nearly knocking Karen over in the process. She let out her own yelp, tumbling backwards into the same muddy puddle she'd found before. I just stood there, watching, amazed. Part of me wanted to feel bad, but another part of me, That part popped popcorn and settled in for the show. Karen scrambled to her feet, caked in mud, hair sticking up at odd angles. "You win this time, Jake Turner," she spat. "But this isn't over." Her husband groaned from the ground. "Karen, maybe we should move." I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. The next morning was quiet, peaceful. No Facebook rants, no protests, no uninvited yoga sessions in my barn. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, savoring the silence. It was the first real peace I'd had in months. Later that afternoon, I got a text from one of the guys at the local feed store. "Hey, heard Karen put her place up for sale." I nearly spit out my drink. Finally, sweet freedom. I waited to throw a party until the moving truck showed up. But when they did, oh, I celebrated. Karen was gone. For good. I didn't think it would ever happen, but there it was. I even let myself hope the universe had finally decided to give me a break. But of course, life's never that simple. I was sitting on my porch a few days later, enjoying the kind of quiet you don't realize you've missed until it's back. Then I heard it, the rumble of another moving truck. I figured it was the new neighbor moving in. A woman climbed out of the driver's seat. She was smiling, waving at me like we were already old pals. She walked over, hands on her hips, surveying my land like she was already laying claim to it. "Hey there, neighbor," she called out. "Wow, you've got a beautiful farm. I was wondering, you don't mind if I take a walk through your fields sometime, do you?" I didn't say anything. I just set my drink down and stared out over my land, like a man who's seen